Good evening, everyone. I'm Ayman Mohideen, along with Catherine Rampell and Elise Jordan. Tonight, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who led Iran since 1989, is dead. Iranian state media confirming Khamenei's death just this past hour. Of course, President Trump even told NBC News that a large amount of Iran's leadership is now gone. Overnight, the U.S. launched major combat operations in Iran, joined by Israel. President Trump, who campaigned on starting no new wars, has now initiated a new military conflict. This, of course, comes as the Israeli military continues to launch another wave of strikes against Iran this evening. That is according to the Israeli military, that says that the new attacks are targeting Iran's ballistic missile array and the aerial defense systems. This is a huge geopolitical moment. We are now witnessing a turning point, not just in foreign policy, but how Donald Trump's second term will be defined. And Iran wasted no time in retaliating by firing missiles at Israel as well as U.S. bases across the region in countries like the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. Of course, all of this could escalate into a broader conflict across the Middle East. And as we await next steps, there is one question hanging over all of this. Why now? In the days leading to this attack, Donald Trump warned Iran had resumed building its nuclear program. But the U.S. and the European Union and officials there told the New York Times there is no evidence that Iran has made active efforts to resume uranium enrichment or even build a mechanism to detonate a bomb. Trump also said Iran was working to build missiles that will soon reach the U.S. But in fact, a recent intel report said that Iran is 10 years away from having such missiles. And then there's Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, who said Iran was, quote, a week away from having enough bomb-making material, adding Iran's enrichment level was at 60%. But just days later, Secretary of State Marco Rubio admitted there was no evidence the Iranians were currently enriching nuclear fuel. So there's no clear answer why the United States did this, nor do we have a clear plan on what comes next. We have this story covered from multiple angles. Joining us now, David Rohde, MS Now senior national security reporter, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, and Amir Hanjani, fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Amir, I'll start with you. And now that we have an official confirmation from Iranian state media that the supreme leader has, in fact, been killed as a result of the airstrikes, what happens next inside Iran?
Well, I think the Iranian leadership, Ayman, has been preparing for this since the summer war with Israel. Iran, the regime, is a nation state. They have layers now and an apparatus behind them. Ayatollah Khamenei, along with the IRGC, along with President Pezeshkian, have been preparing for succession and how they would operate in just this scenario, how they would operate this war, and how the command and control structure would go. What we don't know, and it's not clear, is who else was killed in that strike, because President Pezeshkian, except for some Twitter posts, hasn't really said anything or said much. Arakchi, who was on your network earlier this morning, said, very interesting, he said, as far as I know, they're all safe. But it very clearly, it would fall to Pezeshkian, Ali Larijani, and Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament. That would be a trio that would manage the succession.
General, Trump said in a Truth Social post today that, quote, heavy and pinpoint bombing will continue uninterrupted throughout the week, or as long as necessary to achieve our objective of peace throughout the Middle East and indeed the world. So setting aside the peculiarity of saying that the bombing will continue until we get world peace, I am curious to hear your thoughts on whether there are actual limitations on our munitions ability to continue bombing indefinitely.
There certainly are, Catherine. There are not only restrictions on bombs for the kinetic strike into Iran, there's also huge restrictions on the number of air defense systems we have in the region. As you mentioned earlier, there have been attacks by Iran on 7 different neighbors of theirs in the region, the Arab states, and in many of those, U.S. forces are based. So we're talking about the requirement to have both Patriot and THAAD missile systems. The missiles that are launched from there, from those systems, are extremely expensive. They have all sorts of technology that are very difficult to reproduce, and they're in limited supply. So I would suggest the air campaign could continue because they have the capability to do that, as you're watching these jets come off probably the carrier Lincoln or Ford, and you're seeing some of the Tomahawk missiles launching from those cruisers. So the combination of the kinetic strike from air and missiles are going to continue, and they can continue for weeks. But they are in short supply, and these are precision weapons, so they do have high technologies. I'm more concerned about the air defense equipment that's throughout the region, and which we lend not only the launchers but also sell the missiles, which are extremely limited.
David, I want to hear from you about the Oman foreign minister who you spoke to yesterday. He's mediating the talks. He was quite optimistic that the Iranians were going to make some concessions, and then suddenly we're at war. What happened, and have you spoken to him since?
It was an amazing day yesterday. He had flown all the way from Geneva, where he was sort of going between rooms on Thursday and coordinating the talks between the U.S. and Iran. Heard that he had a chance to meet with J.D. Vance in the White House. And I think he'd been trying to talk, honestly, to President Trump. He flies all night in his jet. He goes into this meeting. And then I was the first reporter to meet with him after he came from the White House. He was optimistic. He said that Vance seemed to listen. He described a deal which could be lower levels of enriched uranium than President Obama got. Also that the Iranians were willing to let U.S. companies come do business in terms of oil and gas in Iran. And he was sort of begging for the U.S. to go to the talks that were supposed to happen on Monday. They were supposed to be expert talks about the nuclear program. Today, he tweeted, I am dismayed. Active and serious negotiations have yet again been undermined. Neither the interests of the United States nor the cause of global peace are well served, and I pray for the innocents who will suffer. I'm trying to speak to him again, but, he carried out negotiations last year as well. And the U.S. launched strikes on Iran. So he's very disappointed. And we can talk about separate things, but I want us at some point to talk about, like, the Iranian people right now, and is enough being done to help them communicate with each other as they protest, or I respect what they have been trying to do, and I don't want to give up on that idea.
Yeah, no, rightfully so. I mean, to that point, Amir, we've seen some videos of Iranians celebrating on the news of Khamenei's death. I'm wondering what you read of what we're hearing coming out of Iran. Some videos showing celebrations. Obviously, there was some video earlier today as well showing people on the streets expressing solidarity for the country. But as somebody who follows this closely, how do you assess what is actually happening on the ground inside of Iran in terms of popularity or even support for this decapitation strike and this joint Israeli-American military operation that is now being characterized, rightfully so, as a regime change war?
Well, Ayman, let me be clear. Over the last 15 years, with continuous protests, the women life freedom protests, the crackdown on the hijab, the protests just last month, which anywhere between 30 and 50,000 protesters were killed. Ayatollah Khamenei was deeply unpopular, and he was very much authoritarian, very much viewed as a dictator by most of the Iranian population. The problem is the portion of the Iranian population that has guns and the security apparatus, the IRGC, the Basij, are intensely loyal to him. And so those are the ones that would be activated to suppress any protests, any celebrations that would go on that would celebrate his death. And we've seen some celebrations, some protesters coming in southern cities and eastern cities, and they're quickly dispersed by the security apparatus. I also think the fact that Iran and Tehran and major cities are under bombardment doesn't allow for people to get out in the streets because they're scared. They're scared they're going to get hit by Israeli or American bombs. So we still have to wait and see how this shakes out, both with the people on the ground and with the new Iranian leadership that's going to take control.
So, General, if we were to pick up on what David said and what Amir said, what is it that the United States and others could potentially be doing right now to tip the balance of power against these besieged forces and those on the ground? We're definitely neutralizing the ballistic missiles. We're certainly bombing the large military installations. But what could happen in these smaller areas across the country that will allow the kind of mass mobilization that Donald Trump is seeking, that could be a tipping point for the regime if they're going up against besieged forces with nothing more than small arms fire like they did last month when they killed 30 to 50,000 Iranians?
Yeah, well, I'll bring in another factor for you, Eamon, to consider that not only are there kinetic strikes as you're showing these huge dust blasts and explosions throughout Iran, but there's also been cyber warfare conducted by the United States and Israel against Iran. So that's shut down most of the television stations, most of the radio stations, and in some cases even the cell phone networks. So it's going to be very difficult for those who do want to stand up and begin changing their government. But truthfully, you know, as we've been talking about, this is going to be very hard. As you know, more than anybody else, this is a very diverse society. There are some that are continuing to be intimidated and threatened by the various security forces. By last count, the Iranian forces between the IGFC and the Bajis, it consists of over 600,000 people with guns. Now, that doesn't seem like a big army, but those are the key people with weapons. So it's going to be very difficult. And the fact that there is no leader that can probably pull this together anytime soon, for the president to say, hey, it's up to you to stand up, Iranian people, to rise up, to choose a new leader, to choose a new path forward. But when you don't have the leadership, when you don't have government agencies in place, when you don't have the infrastructure that you can be talking to one another and coordinating that kind of collaboration for a new government, it's going to be very difficult. And the fact that it doesn't appear the U.S. and Israel went into this with any kind of, technique or plan to establish the kinds of things that are done when regimes changes inside of societies, that's going to make it even more difficult. You know, you're asking that question today in the evening of the first series of strikes. This is something, if there was a plan in place, probably should have been done months ahead of time. So it could have rolled in very quickly and established some leadership potential and some institutions.
David, President Trump has just been incredibly arrogant in how he's pursued this, not even trying to make the case to the American public over a sustained matter of time. And just basically, we're supposed to trust them that there was some imminent threat. Have you gotten any sense, you're so well sourced among national security officials, that there is a plan, that there is an end state that they're trying to reach? There's some goal, because he's just been so all over the place. And I don't know, trying to just get some hope here that it's not just Trump shooting from the hip and there might be more of a strategy here. I'm
hearing that this incredibly small circle is around the president. You saw this in the negotiations. It's Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Sometimes Marco Rubio is involved, sometimes J.D. Vance. But it's the president himself who's making this decision, who made this decision to bomb. And so I'm worried that he's just enamored now with military force in the wake of the incredibly successful and brave American raid that got Maduro. So that's the problem. And I guess back to the Iranian people, I was talking to Jason Rezaian, the Washington Post journalist who was held himself in Iran. You know, he said there's been no indications from his family members and contacts in Iran that there has been an effort to try to restore the internet somehow. That might be very difficult on the first day, but one of the monitoring groups said 96% of the internet in Iran is shut down. Yeah. And it's so important for these protesters to be able to talk to each other, but also to talk to the outside world, to send that image right there of the people celebrating the streets, to share that with the world. And so I just, we're at the beginning of a process. People might have issues with Trump and how he's doing this, but there is the Mossad or, the CIA, there should be planning. There maybe is something going on to try to help organize this in Iran, and we just have to see what happens.
David Rohde, General Mark Hertling, and Amir Hanjani, thank you.